Hello and welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Carrie Oderman with UATV. Ukraine's renewable sector has been one of the key focuses of international investment into the country over the past 3 years. For example, Norwegian company Scatec Solar is among the largest investors in Ukraine's renewable energy industry. This company entered the Ukrainian market in 2017 and is currently developing a significant project portfolio. In 2018, Scatec Solar established and acquired about half a dozen companies in Ukraine to implement its projects on the construction of solar power plants. To talk more about Scatec Solar's efforts to boost Ukraine's renewable potential, we are joined in the studio today by Magnus Berg Johansen, co-chair of the working group of the European-Ukrainian Energy Agency and business development manager from Scatec Solar. Hello. And thank you for joining us. Okay. After that rather lengthy intro, why don't you tell us about Norway's role in the Ukrainian renewable energy market to begin with?
Well, I can probably better speak on behalf of Scatec rather than Norway, but I can do it jointly. I think in terms of the Scatec angle, we are a global investor in solar energy projects. We are basically an investor and a construction company in one. And we have a model where we tailor high-risk markets, basically. So we are often the first entry into different, what is considered high-risk markets. And we've been very successful around various continents around the world in installing and building large-scale solar projects. The reason why you see also more Norwegian investors is probably slightly how do you say it? It hasn't been planned out within Norwegian parties, of course, but it is a reaction of a market that has been able to attract parties of Norwegian investors, and it's so far been quite successful for a number of Norwegian renewable investors. And in our case, we have now, as you mentioned, we are building about half a dozen projects. We are trying to finalize the construction of what will be almost 400 megawatts in Ukraine, which will put us as the absolute largest foreign solar constructing and owning company with the total capex of almost 400 million euros. So that will be there's still quite a lot of work to do. We were just not even halfway in the construction phase, but so far it's looking fairly positive.
Scatec is familiar with undeveloped or maybe unstable markets. That was going to be my next question, because renewable energies are very popular investments right now. But Ukraine has the problem where some people are shy of the market because of the conflict in the Donbass. Scatec has experience. Could you maybe list some of the other areas worldwide where Scatec has gone into areas that maybe weren't stable?
Well, we have operating assets in countries like South Africa, about now in Egypt, Honduras, Southeast Asia, Brazil. So we have the philosophy that sometimes the perceived risk is not the same as the real risk. And we do our assessments, and in many markets we assess the real risk to be lower than the perceived risk. And I think, quite frankly, in Ukraine, the issue on the east border is probably slightly heightened in the international finance environment. There are other topics, I think, that are more high-risk elements or risky elements that you need to have in mind as a foreign investor. And we have a company culture which is very bullish. We believe that, I think there's a Chinese quote saying that if you jump, a safety net will unfold at some point. And it's partly our philosophy. And I think also we've been very successful in pulling things together historically. And that's why you're seeing us in Ukraine as well right now.
Okay, so you have a good track record. You know where your business works the best. Tell me a little bit about Ukraine's geography. What are some of the best places in Ukraine for people or companies like your own to have solar power or solar panels?
Well, obviously in the south, there you have the highest solar irradiation. So the further south you go, the more solar resource you have and the more economics you produce. And this is obviously a very well-known topic for people operating in renewable in Ukraine, partly also because you have the same aspect for wind. There's a lot of consistent, strong winds blowing in the south, That's why you see a lot of development happening in the south, which presents a bit of a challenge for Ukraine, because it also means you need to be able to absorb all that energy produced. And so the big limitation for Ukraine right now is the national grid, which cannot absorb everything from the south. And therefore you will need to have installation more around central Ukraine, for example, or even northern Ukraine. But there you will have a solar irradiation, for example, which is about 30% lower, which means comparing south to the north, you will have about 30% less revenues, which obviously has a tremendous economic impact.
Infrastructure is obviously a problem here, but that's a problem with energy in Ukraine in general. Right now, Ukraine is dependent on Russian natural gas. Now they're looking into renewables, but we have a foreign country coming in, which will have a great share of the solar power grid. What is your discussion, or your company's discussion, or your role with the European Union in trying to balance this and ease some of the worries of Ukrainians?
Well, we are a facilitator. So basically you might say this is a model which is common around the world, where a government has a less of a capacity to make installments in time, so they outsource that work, and for that outsourcing it's a tender and you have a certain economic return. This is common in other industries as well. And basically we then have a period where we're sitting on this asset, and thereafter it's the ownership of Ukraine. So this is a model that you see around the world. So it's not really us just coming in and taking advantage, it's more that we are facilitating the infrastructural development at a higher pace. And in the end, it ends up being an asset of the Ukrainian people, or government, you might say.
In 2010, about 90% of Ukraine's energy came from coal. The goal now is that at least 11% will come in 2020 from renewables. Are we well on our way there? That's just next year.
Well, it's different views on this, because I think in some way we are advancing quickly, because we're having a fairly big boom right now, especially this year, where we're installing potentially a few gigawatts of renewable, which is quite a lot for a country like Ukraine. On the flip side, you have a strategy which is very ambitious, and it's partly coming from, of course, Brussels and Europe, and it's also partly coming from the fact that Ukraine wants to move towards Europe and away from Russia. I think irrespective of the strategy, there is other aspects that are limiting the capacity of growing quickly, which again is, for example, the national grid, which will be the big limitator of continued growth in Ukraine. And I think as long as there is a key focus on making this continue to facilitate more generation, hopefully Ukraine will be able to move closer to the high strategy ambitions they have with alignment of Europe.
So for people to understand the importance of renewables and the infrastructure that's needed for it, let's look at how your country, Norway, and the rest of Western Europe and other countries throughout the world, they've really embraced renewable energy. Is it your opinion that Ukrainians are on par with this excitement to embrace renewables, or is there a little bit of catch-up work that needs to be done with the general public?
I think I would separate between the public, the people, and the public sector.
Okay.
Because our industry is not business to consumer, it's not business to business, it's business to public. So basically the public is our buyer of service. And in this way, the public decides how much service they want. And this is different from the people, who basically is the consumers, you might say. So on the consumer side, people are indeed embracing renewables. Whenever I say I'm working in solar, they are cheering and they're very happy. So the feeling, the sentiment on the ground is very positive. And I think also the sentiment on the governmental level, on the public procurement level, is very positive. They're seeing the benefits of moving towards renewable energy. There is criticism about the price of it, because Ukraine is coming from a historically low electricity cost market, where most is subsidized, and even nuclear plants are producing without preparing for commissioning, decommissioning, and other aspects. So there is this balance, at least from the public procurement aspect. I see that they are in general very happy to have renewable. They are questioning the cost, in some cases rightfully so, but at the same time it needs to be realistic. And this is where we see with excitement what will happen in the next couple of years in Ukraine. what will actually be the price and how will be the political push on the tariff costs.
Now, are you buying up or renting large swaths of land for these solar panels? And if so, is the land reform that President Zelensky is speaking of relevant for your company?
Well, we're buying. So you basically in our development we have different stages. So we basically have someone locally who's done early stage development, which means allocating the land for electricity purpose, which is normally then land which is under lease agreement with municipality for say 25-50 years. And then normally they get the allowance to connect the project to the grid, and we normally come in just thereafter. We've done a bit early stage as well, but we come in a bit thereafter. So basically our expertise is not so much about the land topic. As long as we see that the land has been prepared according to law and regulations, so that we can able to start the design works of interconnecting, this is really where our skill comes in. So I think in regarding this question, it's not a topic we have been looking really into, because right now we have a process anyway, legally speaking, that you need to go through, which is in many ways then assessed and evaluated and confirmed by our legal experts, and then thereafter we will go into the project. So the short question or answer is no. We haven't assessed these new topics of agriculture.
The reason I ask that is because the Chinese have came into the Ukrainian market, have been buying up a great deal of land. I'm wondering if the Chinese, who are also very active in the development of solar panels, are one of your competitors here in Ukraine.
They are, well, I wouldn't say, well, they have different functions. Obviously, a lot of solar procurement comes from China because they've now built up a very large infrastructure of manufacturing of the solar industry globally. And also they have very competent EPC organizations. We have teamed up with one for one of the projects,
EPC.
Power China. Yeah, EPC means the party that basically is doing a lot of the physical construction work. So we are overseeing, we're the umbrella, and then we ask someone to do the physical work. In most cases, we find a partner in every country we go to do this physical work, who then find the subcontractors. In Ukraine, we have, for example, teamed up with one Chinese. They are so far also bringing in financing capacities. So in many ways, you can say they are challenging a bit the European investors, the development-oriented investors like EBRD, which we are also now exploring. So they are coming in different ways and forms, and it's natural. They're a large country with large resources, and I think they are more risk tolerant than the Americans and most of the Europeans as well.
Doing business in Ukraine can be unpredictable. With the new administration and President Volodymyr Zelensky's administration, how do you foresee how he could adjust or change policy to make your job easier?
Oh, that's a big and good question. I think addressing bureaucracy is one, of course. That takes time. I think the key aspect is to ensure predictability, to ensure that what he is communicating is actually followed up in action. This is what we will be monitoring quite closely. And of course, ensuring the reduction and removal of corruption possibilities in the system. We've been, of course, sensing this around the market. We have ethical standards that doesn't allow us to do that, which is very good. And I think that when you have someone very influential that can facilitate and allow for the continuation of an easier market, a more competitive market, it's to the benefit of internationals and to the benefit of Ukrainians.
Scatec's right now in the market, and you're here to stay. What are your mid and long-term plans for the company here in Ukraine?
Well, it's we are obviously, we now have almost 70 people hired in Ukraine. It's quite
local nationals.
Yes, yeah, quite impressive how we've been able to scale up so quickly from just being a few people 1 year ago. And obviously that's a pool of very skilled people who are basically ready to jump on the next phase as well. So we are assessing what are future growth possibilities. I think and I hope that you will see us continue growing in this market in different ways and forms. And this market is very alive. You say unpredictability, you can also say it's very alive, it's moving. And if you're then competent, you can find mutual win-wins, you know. And I think in this case we are having some very good sensors who are trying to understand where we can add value as a company and where we can have where our business model works for Ukraine, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think and I hope that you will see us continue growing in Ukraine.
Well, that's all the time we have. Let's hope Scatec Solar's future is sunny in Ukraine. That was Magnus Berg Johansen, co-chair of the working group of the European-Ukrainian Energy Agency and business development manager of Scatec Solar. Thank you for watching Head to Head, and stay tuned for more.